Pompeii, near Naples, southern Italy, summer of 79 CE. Life is sweet if you are a Roman citizen, but not a slave. The empire extends from Spain to the Black Sea, from Britannia to Egypt. After the year of 4 emperors, 69 CE, Rome has been under the firm and stable rule of Emperor Vespasian for 10 years. The emperor has just started building the Flavian Amphitheatre, which will later be known as the Colosseum. For the moment, you are content with your own gladiatorial shows in an arena that can sit half the population of your rich and beautiful town. The earth has shaken lately. Was it because of the weather? You're not worried as you bite into yet another honeyed fig. Then you notice a plume, a column of smoke lifting from the top of the nearby Mount Vesuvius. You don't know it yet, but the very gates of Hades are about to open and unleash on Pompeii the flames of the end. And with that, welcome to Geographics. Today we're going to explore Pompeii, the Roman town that in August of 79 CE was destroyed by one of the most devastating volcanic eruptions of ancient times. We're going to discover what life was like before the disaster, how did the explosion happen, and what is the legacy of a city burned by ashes but frozen in time. Just before we get started today, I do want to say that obviously there are going to be some rather graphic and gruesome details, so consider yourself warned. The area where Pompeii was founded was particularly attractive to settlers thanks to a favorable climate and rich soil. This soil was especially suitable to growing olives and grapes, which are still an important product of the region today. Little did the Romans know that the richness of this soil was volcanic in nature and due to a long-forgotten eruption of the now innocent-looking mountain overshadowing the sea, Mount Vesuvius. The eruption occurred around 1800 BC. Several archaeological sites, especially one near Nola, reveal the destruction of Bronze Age settlements. But its memory was lost, and the Romans knew nothing. In fact, their civilization may never have witnessed directly a volcanic explosion. However, in Greek mythology, there is at least a hint of the power of Vesuvius. According to legend, it was here that Herakleion, or Hercules for the Romans, had fought giants in a fiery landscape. It is not by chance that the nearby town of Herculaneum, destroyed alongside Pompeii, was named after this heroic episode. In addition, Roman historian Servius wrote that the name Pompeii itself derives from the word Pompeii. This means a procession in honor of Hercules' victory over the giants. Following the Bronze Age settlements, the next steady settlers of the region were Greek colonizers present from the 8th century BCE until 474 BCE. From then on, the Samnite people from the surrounding mountains began to infiltrate and dominate the region. The Samnite expansion soon attracted the attention of Rome. Taking advantage of their infighting, the Romans defeated them in the Samnite Wars from 343 to 290 BCE, eventually taking over what is today the Campania region. The Romans took a liking to Pompeii, and I mean, what's not to like about a seaside town on the Gulf of Naples, ripe with olives and wine? I mean, sign me up. In the 2nd century BCE, the town flourished with large building projects. However, the Pompeians took to the habit of rebelling against the central power of Rome until Consul Sulla besieged the town in 80 BCE and resettled 5,000 legionaries in the town. As the century ended, Pompeii entered its period of peak prosperity. A local senate was established and a new amphitheatre was built with a capacity for 5,000 spectators. Pompeii used to cover an area of 3 square kilometers, which is about 1.3 square miles, without counting the outer suburbs, plus hundreds of villas and farms in the countryside. The population of the town has been estimated to have had between 10 and 12,000 people, with a third of them being slaves. This is twice as many as would have lived in the surrounding farms and villas. And let's just consider these villas for a second. They were grandiose, many of them had panoramic views of the Gulf. This coast was a sort of playground for the Roman elite. In fact, even the notorious Emperor Nero is thought to have enjoyed some prime real estate near Pompeii. His wife, Poppaea Sabina, was a native of the town after all. But Pompeii was not just a fancy resort, it served a very important function. Its port was one of the more important on the Gulf of Naples, from where local produce was shipped to the farthest locations of the empire. Pompeians exported olive oil, wine, wool, salt, walnuts, figs, almonds, cherries, apricots, onions, cabbages, and wheat. On the other hand, they imported exotic fruit, spices, giant clams, silk, sandalwood, wild animals for the arena, and, very importantly, slaves. As you've just heard, most of the trade involved food, and we know that Pompeians treated themselves pretty well. They're particularly fond of beef, pork, oysters, shellfish, artichokes, and, well, the list goes on. Beyond the port, the town itself was bustling with activity, as we can deduct from the variety of buildings which included shops of all kinds, gyms, baths, a market hall, and a disproportionate amount of brothels. But the most striking of all these buildings were the patrician houses. Many of them had been decorated with magnificent floor mosaics and wall paintings which depict all manner of scenes from myths to daily life, such as religion, industry, and very often the sexual habits of the residents. Many of the larger villas also had a permanent triclinium, or eating area, in the garden. 10 of them even had systems of small canals running between the diners so that as dishes floated past, they could take their pick of the delicacies on offer. That's right, they essentially had the ancient version of a sushi bar, only they had roast mice dipped in rotting fish sauce instead of a California roll. In complete contrast to the richer residencies, archaeologists have also dug out the slave quarters. They were cramped, unsanitary, and prison-like dwellings, often not far from curtained cubicles where lower-class prostitutes worked their trade. By the summer of 79 AD, the Pompeians had little reason to think that a catastrophe was looming, and why would they? The economy of the Gulf was booming, and the holiday villas of the rich brought in constant investment. And yet, the preceding years, they were rife with signs that could have warned them of the impending disaster. The Romans were obsessed with predicting the future by observing portents in the shape of strange sights or sounds or unusual births. But only a few years earlier, there had been far less mysterious signs, only had they known how to interpret them. Philosopher Seneca, advisor to the Emperor Nero, was writing a treatise on the causes of earthquakes in 63 CE when a catastrophic one hit the Campania region, causing extensive damage to both Pompeii and Herakleion. Seneca's theory was that earthquakes in different parts of the world were all interconnected and that they could possibly be caused by stormy weather. But of course, he didn't have the scientific means to link them with volcanic activity. He downplayed the danger, going as far as chastising the landowners who were deserting Campania for fear of further earthquakes. The damage of the earthquake in 63 CE was so bad that entire houses were demolished and reduced to agricultural land. Other houses were still standing in 79 CE, but their doors to the top floors had been boarded up, indicating fear that the higher floors may still collapse. But probably to the approval of Seneca, most of the population did not abandon Pompeii. Damaged houses were still being repaired and redecorated in 79 CE, and there was an extensive program to restore public buildings in the Forum of Pompeii. The earth did not shake only in 63 CE, though. Archaeologists have pieced together clues which indicate that further earthquakes took place in the weeks or possibly just days before the eruption. For example, an open trench was found by a water tower, indicating that a shock may have damaged the water supply and repair works were ongoing. Further, many of the evacuated houses showed signs of repair and redecoration, heaps of plaster, pots, and rebuilding tools. It's a simple, prosaic image, which suddenly, in this context, turns into the tragic, frozen picture of a population undeterred by disaster, dedicated to repairing their damage, unaware of what was to come. Mount Vesuvius erupted on the 24th of August 79 CE, or possibly on the 24th of October, according to recent findings. The eruption lasted for more than 24 hours. At first, it manifested itself as a giant column of thick smoke, which was actually combined with tons of ash, a volcanic rock known as pumice, and lithic debris. All these materials subsequently rained over Pompeii. According to some accounts, this rain was not necessarily lethal, while according to other studies, their accumulated weight resulted in the collapse of several houses, crushing their inhabitants to death. Some of the Pompeians fled at once, and they did the right thing. Think about their perspective. This was the first time in living memory that someone had experienced such a sight. For all they knew, this could be the wrath of the gods. Many others thought that their best chance was to seek a robust shelter and wait for the mysterious clouds to clear. Among them were two who would make and write history. They were Pliny the Elder and his nephew Pliny the Younger. The elder was a celebrated author, a successful administrator, a scientist, and a naval commander. At that time, he was serving as the commander of the Mycenaean fleet stationed in Campania. His motivation to stay was not motivated only by ill-judged self-preservation. He had an intense scientific curiosity which may have led him initially to stay in Pompeii to observe this unseen phenomenon. But soon he realized the dangers for the population, and he put his ships at their service, conducting relief efforts for the evacuation of the Pompeians. His nephew, the Younger, barely 18 on that day, would also become an author and a public official. In his lifetime, he wrote a collection of private letters that illustrate in detail the public and and private life of the Roman Empire. Amongst the few survivors of Pompeii, Pliny the Younger wrote the only surviving eyewitness account of the eruption in letters to his friend Tacitus, an orator and historian. In his writings, he tells of the valiant efforts led by his uncle to save the citizens from destruction and how this caused his death by asphyxiation. The rain of ashes may have caused structural collapse, but for sure it had thickened the air around Pompeii, making it almost impossible to breathe. Particles of ash clung to the airways, clogging the nostrils, throats, and lungs. While standing on the deck of his ships and giving orders to help, Pliny the Elder slowly collapsed. He simply lay down on the deck of his boat, and he died. But the worst? Well, that was still to come. Around midnight, the column of smoke and ash above Vesuvius, also known as an eruptive column, it collapsed. This caused the first pyroclastic surge. In lay terms, a pyroclastic surge is an avalanche of volcanic material, a massive wave of hot ash, rock fragments, and gas rushing down the slopes of a volcano. And now the surge is traveling faster than 100 kilometers or 60 miles per hour towards the people of Pompeii and Herakleion. It's burning the face of the earth, which was once rich and prosperous, a tidal wave of unknown fear finally unleashed. Hundreds of refugees were seeking shelter in the vaulted arcades by the seaside. They were clutching their possessions. They were murmuring prayers to the gods. Mothers were whispering to their children, dragging them from their beds while they were still asleep. The arcades, they were carved in stone, facing away from Vesuvius, giving them a sense of safety. When the surge finally reached them, they were exposed to an intense heat of 500 degrees Celsius, that's 900 degrees Fahrenheit. The passing of the surge lasted for 150 seconds, and they were all dead, for 149 of them. In its destructive path, nature knows how to be swift and merciful, and it did not even wake up the children. Forensic experts analyzed the skulls of the victims and consistently noticed holes by their temples. They deduced that the intense heat of the surge had caused the brains to immediately melt and then to boil, eventually bursting out of the skulls due to extreme pressure. The flesh of the citizens had also been suddenly vaporized, bursting into a red mist which then deposited on their bones. It was as if the Pompeians had been caught in a storm of fire and blood raining from a lacerated sky. And this was only the first wave. A hail of pumice had covered the streets in a layer at times as thick as 3 meters, that's 10 feet. Many of the bodies were burned to their bones or completely consumed by fire. Most of the deceased were covered in layers of ash and lithics, like frozen images of their immediate demise. Some of these corpses were found with their arms raised close to the mouth like boxes. This has led archaeologists to believe that they were defending themselves against attackers or covering their airways, which led them to believe that asphyxiation was the leading cause of death. However, this pose was found to be another consequence of extreme temperatures. Sudden heat can, in fact, cause the muscles of the arms to contract. The fists are clenched and raised close to the head. But how many people died on that day? It is impossible to tell, but surely the death toll was in the tens of thousands. The Romans were accustomed to huge losses of life in battle, and even they regarded this catastrophe as exceptional. The corpses found in Pompeii or Herakleion were only a fraction of the number of victims. The destruction spread to the entire area south of Vesuvius and onto the Sorrentine Peninsula. Many more died in the countryside and even at sea in a last attempt to sail to safety. The effects of the eruption were traumatic. The same resilient people who had rebuilt their cities after the previous earthquakes failed to reoccupy the sites involved in the destruction. Pompeii remained a ghost town, inhabited only by looters. The tunnels they excavated are still visible today. Room after room of the city's buildings had holes hacked through the walls by tunnelers and extensively sacked. The cities on the Gulf of Naples swiftly recovered. The coast continued to attract rich holidaymakers, but never again regains the popularity that it had had before the disaster, when it was Rome's playground. It took 18 centuries for the area to flourish again when Naples became an attractive capital under the Bourbon kings. The rich courtiers and ambassadors of that time built their villas on the Gulf, bringing new life to the region. The aristocrats of Europe established the tradition of the Grand Tour, and the hidden treasures of the Gulf of Naples attracted international fascination. Pompeii was finally rediscovered in 1755 CE when work on the construction of the Sarno Canal began. Under just a few meters of volcanic debris, diggers were surprised to find an entire town. From then on, Pompeii became an essential destination for grand tours, attracting such famous visitors as Goethe, Mozart, and Stendhal. Besides architectural remains, scholars of Pompeii were presented with a treasure trove of rare historical artifacts, providing a unique window into the past. Archaeologists found an ingenious process to take plaster casts of the impressions that were left by the dead in volcanic material. These eerie casts can be seen today in Pompeii. Some of them, as we mentioned earlier, look like boxers who have just been knocked down. Some are crouching, maybe seeking shelter. Others looked as though they had been surprised in their sleep. The analysis of the casts and of the skeletons has provided evidence of the health and lifestyle of ancient Pompeians. For example, bad teeth were a common problem. Tooth decay was rife due to an oversweet diet, and enamel was worn away by stone chips and bread. Tuberculosis and malaria were, of course, also prevalent. But the saddest finds are the skeletal remains of slaves. Often they were found still chained, unable to escape the disaster. Their bones also show very clearly the signs of malnutrition, chronic arthritis, and deformity caused by overwork. It has also been possible to reconstruct the daily life of the town thanks to the scores of written records preserved at the site. These take the form of thousands of electoral notices and hundreds of wax tablets, mainly dealing with financial transactions. Other sources include signs, graffiti, and tomb inscriptions, which give an insight into sections of society which Romans considered to be of lower standing: slaves, women, and gladiators. All of them are usually ignored by surviving books and legal records. The graffiti, in particular, offers a joyous view of the ordinary lives of ordinary people, which offers a refreshing contrast to the tragedy of the eruption and reminds us that this archaeological site was once inhabited by people rather than skeletons or plaster casts. One romantic graffiti in a private house tells us that Secundus says hello to his prima wherever she is. I ask my mistress that you love me. Not all inscriptions are so heartfelt. This one outside another house issues a warning to a very rude citizen. To the one defecating here, beware of the curse. If you look down on this curse, may you have an angry Jupiter for an enemy. Scrounging patrons at the Tavern of Salvius are told, whoever wants to serve themselves can go on and drink from the sea. At the Inn of the Mule Drivers, we have wet the bed host. I confess we have done wrong. If you want to know why, there was no chamber pot. In the barracks of the gladiators, we learn that Florinus, privileged soldier of the 7th Legion, was here. The women did not know of his presence. Only 6 women came to know, too few for such a stallion. And a very bored gladiator wrote, on April the 19th, I made bread. Further, in a tavern in Herakleion, a series of inscriptions tells the story of 2 BFFs, Apelles and Dexter. The first night, they write, 2 friends were here. While they had very bad service in every way from a guy named Epaphroditus. They threw him out and spent 105.5 sestertii most agreeably on whores. They then returned to looking for a better service. Apelles the chamberlain with Dexter, a slave of Caesar, ate here most agreeably and had a screw at the same time. These guys are becoming regulars as we read that Apelles Mus and his brother Dexter each pleasurably had sex with 2 girls twice. So while at school we learned that Romans invented concrete, apparently they also invented an early version of TripAdvisor. Pompeii and Herculaneum are one of the best and biggest tourist attractions in Italy, and if you're lucky enough to travel south of Rome, I strongly recommend that you pay a visit there. Pompeii, in a way, was a microcosm representing the whole of the Roman civilization, with its amphitheatre, the legionaries, the gladiators, the villas for the rich, and the slums for the slaves. If we were to look for some kind of sense in the blind wrath of the natural disaster that destroyed it, well, this could be a symbol that even when nearing its peak, the empire was not guaranteed to be eternal. Or we could perhaps say that the gods decided to punish the hubris of these mere mortals whose expanding power was based on the tainted foundations of slavery and moral corruption. But sometimes, even when the harshest tragedies occur, there simply is no reason. They just happen. It is up to us to provide meaning by remembering and celebrating what could have been lost forever. Pompeii, like a giant time capsule preserved in ash for centuries, gives us a perfect opportunity to do just that. So I really hope you found that video interesting. If you did, you know what to do. Please do subscribe. This is a new channel. We would appreciate it. Give this video a like, smash that like button, all of that good stuff, and I'll see you next time.